These weren't particularly exciting ones, but then we're going to get on to, let's say, more fun ones. I don't want to say these are bad, but 0 and 1 are not probabilities as a follow-up to what we talked about like a month ago, because we didn't do these last week or last episode. Yeah. It reiterates the point that positive and negative infinity are not integers,
but rather special symbols for talking about the behavior of integers. And I really liked that phrasing because I don't remember hearing it put that way before.
Yeah, like I haven't talked about infinity in real life since I was a kid. And just kind of like the idea of like, well, if I add 5 to infinity, is it bigger? So I think the post, this is why I think it's not like the most fun one I've read, is that like it gets mathy. And if you're a math nerd, you'll love it. If you're not, I think it's really hard to talk about math, although I did listen to this episode or listen to this post and not read it. So that might have been part of why it was a little less fun. But I'm also just not a math nerd.
I think that's definitely a big part of it because I am also not a math nerd. But when it got to that big paragraph about the odds ratios and transforming them into probabilities, like I sat down, I reread it again after I read it, and then I didn't... Like, you don't reread it when you're trying to figure out these sorts of puzzles, but you keep taking little pieces of it back and forth and seeing how they apply and trying to work the details and the relationships out together. And like, I got it after a few minutes. And honestly, it was kind of fun to like puzzle it out. Like, why is the odds ratio 1 to 5 on a die? That only takes a few seconds to figure out. And then to double check how the probability works out. But it was like a little puzzle piecing it all together. And I had a bit of fun doing it, but also I guess I wouldn't really choose to do those sorts of puzzles anymore. And it reminded me how much I've stopped caring about games. I don't know if this is just an aspect of getting older where you start moving away from the explore phase of life and going more into the exploit things, because figuring out puzzles like that, I think, is definitely more explore mindset. And like, I just don't care about games nearly as much as I used to. They aren't intrinsically fun often anymore. And this was like, yeah, that was fun to do one time. I wouldn't want to just keep doing these sorts of puzzles as a fun activity.
For what it's worth, you're not quite out of the explorer mentality yet because you're doing all kinds of cool stuff, right? You just explored the Bay Area for Solstice Party, you're going to Europe, etc. Maybe you're exploiting experiences out of those rather than exploring, but
yeah, it could be.
When you brought up gaming, you bring up an interesting thought for me, which is when you're playing a game, you can play it or you can play to game it, right? Like you can Raymer the game. Min-max, find all the ways to stack the certain buffs where it's as good as possible. It's like I've been playing for the last year Back 4 Blood, the Left 4 Dead successor. You know, the new character has bleed damage as a perk that comes native with them. People have put together like long Excel spreadsheets where if you then stack in the other things with like these cards, these multiply, these ones are additive, this other character's team buff adds this. Well, this person's bleed damage can be through the fucking roof. And I'm like, I really don't care that much. I like shooting zombies, right? But there are different levels to enjoy the game on, right? Some people love that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm playing with somebody online or whatever, and they're talking about how they're doing that. Like, yeah, that's really cool. That's interesting. But I'm not going to put in an hour of work to figure out exactly how to set up my team so that I can get the most damage per bullet possible, right?
Right.
I just got to shoot him in the face. Like, that's my kind of game. There's a line in there. He says that the difference between any 2 degrees of uncertainty equals the amount of evidence you would need to go from one to the other.
Yes, that was the key thing in here. Great insight.
Oh, you also put that in bold on the notes too. Yeah, perfect.
I did, yeah. He points out that like 0 and 1 are numbers and probabilities are numbers. And so it seems like 0 and 1 should be probabilities, but there's multiple ways to handle the concept of probabilities. And for example, when you transform probabilities into odds ratios, 1 goes to positive infinity. And positive infinity is not a number. You can't do math to it. And at least not in the probabilistic sense here. When you transform probabilities to log odds, 0 goes to negative infinity and 1 goes to positive infinity. So again, both 0 and 1 are not numbers in terms of these probabilities. So you shouldn't use them for those. And that's also when he's talking about log odds, where he points out that the distance between any 2 of these degrees of uncertainty is how much evidence you would need to go from one to the other, which is a absolutely wonderful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, like I don't have a percentage, a confidence level on how sure I am that the recording software and the backup that I'm using are sufficient that this audio won't be lost, right? It's high enough that I'm not going to bother to think about it.
Yes.
There was a time a couple of years ago when it wasn't, and I was very worried about it. The episode right before we did our HPMR wrap-up call with Yudkowsky, we had an episode with Richard Acton, I believe, and he was in Europe, was for the Basic Conspiracy. My audio for that was lost.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, now I'm not confident at all that my stuff is working. I had triplicate backup for the next one, but I didn't have numbers.
Combining the previous thing about log odds with distance between 2 degrees of uncertainty equals the amount of evidence you need to change your uncertainty position. Using the log odds exposes the fact that reaching infinite certainty requires infinitely strong evidence, just as infinite absurdity requires infinitely strong evidence. So you can't. Like, there's literally no amount of evidence that can make you infinitely certain, because there's no such thing as an infinite amount of evidence. The second post was beautiful math. I don't know that there's much to talk about in it. Like, it's good to read it because it is a very salient example of the beauty in math and how it just kind of arises intrinsically from the fact that numbers are a thing. Are they a thing? I don't know. It's, as he says in here, this is what creates the impression of a mathematical universe that is out there in Platonia, a universe which humans are exploring rather than creating. These things that emerge from it are not anything that anyone built into it. It wasn't anything that was expected. It emerges from the system, and the system appears to be tied directly to how the universe actually exists, at least as far as we can perceive it.
This is the sort of thing, back when I thought about philosophy more, I thought was kind of interesting, but I never even got that into, which you'd think I would. The thing is, like, are numbers real, or is math real? Sounds to me like a wrong question. It's not real in the same way that, like, this mug of water, because now it's not coffee, is next to me, right? However, the fact that there is one mug is a real fact, right? Mm-hmm. So it's different. I think real is doing too much work there. There was an interesting conversation with this, I think it was Max Tegmark, or maybe it was David Deutsch. In any case, there is amongst the elite mathists and math philosophers discussion and disagreement about this. I think it's cool. Like, for me, like, beautiful math is just like, I don't know, random, like, nothing that it goes beyond, like, third grade math. Or it's kind of fun knowing how to get a percentage, you know, if you have two values or something, right? That's about the limit of the math I do day to day. It is just kind of fun to think about the patterns that are always, always true.
It just seems really cool to me that these patterns do emerge. And as Yudkowsky says, the amazing thing is that math is a game without a designer.
That's pretty cool. What's nice about this post is that I don't see how this gets us any closer to AI alignment, which means that it's just Yudkowsky indulging himself in how fun math is, and I fully endorse that. If this is fun to you, have fun, man. It's great.
It might be related in some way, and also AIs run on math, but then again, everything runs on math, so...
And, you know, okay, you're right. If I give it a little more thought into it, he's like, look, math is needed for AI alignment. Math is actually cool, despite what they told you in school. Math is fun and beautiful, not ugly and scary. And so you should love math like I do, and then you can help work on AI alignment.
I do think this post is really worth reading, because if you don't have a intuition for how beautiful math can be, reading this really helps bring that out, because it's really cool shit. And it's a very short post, and it is going to probably be important for the next few posts that we read, because the next one is Expecting Beauty, and the one after that is reality ugly?